The 9/11 report, we've just heard from our co-host, Peter Basulka, who shared that dreadful experience with me. I'm going to make a short statement about it, and then we're going to go directly to our guest, Dr. Bruce Cornet, and we're going to talk about mass extinction, the old days, as a forewarning about possible mass extinction in the near future if we let the course of world events continue on the wrong track of history. So as I said, earlier this morning, a friend of mine sent me a link to a reminder of what had happened, not on 9/11, but on 9/10/2001. And that was at the Pentagon. The Pentagon had announced, that was Donald Rumsfeld, the Pentagon had announced that they had lost $2.3 billion and nobody knew where it had gone. And that was the big story of the day. It was all over the mass media and everyone was asking, where did the $2.5 trillion go and how could the Pentagon lose it? Who is responsible? And all those questions died away on 9/11 at about 8:45 and then 9:15 or so when the second plane hit. My mother called me to tell me, Robert, a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. And as you know, I've been a pilot for 30 years, more than 30 years. And I was shocked. And then I turned on the television and I saw the hole in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And I looked at the sky. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. As Peter said, it was one of the most beautiful days in our memories. And I said, how could any pilot hit the World Trade Center? You know, assuming it was an accident. But about 15 minutes later, I saw another airplane come in from New Jersey. It flew over the Statue of Liberty and then made such a hard turn. Like a pilot, like a fighter pilot, made a hard left turn to hit the South Tower. And I had the impression that there was a gorilla flying the plane because the strength that it would take to take a 757 airliner and turn it like a fighter plane to plow into the South Tower was just mind-boggling. There's much more to be told, but I'm going to hold that. But I'm going to tell you why I don't commemorate 9/11 the way most people do. Actually, for me, the 9/11 con job was such a huge MK Ultra psyop, psychological aberration, attack on us, that I do actually try to forget it on this day because nothing that the Mockingbird media told us was true then, and nothing that they say about it now is true. On this day, I shut off all media to avoid exposure to the death cult's lugubrious memorials, to the biggest lie of the 21st century, the biggest lie so far. For me, that dark era really ended when Sully, the airline pilot, landed a US Airways Airbus airliner in the Hudson River. And I saw 150 people walking on the water. When they went out onto the wings, you couldn't see the wings. And I saw 150 people walking on water like Jesus. And that for me was the bookend to the 9/11 saga, except for the task of exposing the deep state culprits. The Mossad, Israel's, the deep state, the CIA, the FBI, the Project for a New America, and the New World Order, who pulled it off. Are you aware that Donald Trump, that day, when he saw that, he said that was controlled demolition? He was the first and only person that day to say, no, that wasn't airplanes. Airplanes can't bring down a building. That was controlled demolition. I'm looking now at the picture of the airliner sitting in the water with 150 people walking on the wings. And for me, that was the bookend. It was the miracle, which is the opposite of the tragedy of 9/11. But for those who wish to know the truth, of 9/11, I recommend a report by Barbara Honegger, whom you've heard on this program many times, which I consider to be the definitive documentary on the 9/11 attacks. It's called Behind the Smoke Curtain by Barbara Honegger. It's on Rumble. It was on YouTube. It got nearly 1 million hits. YouTube quashed it. And fortunately, Rumble doesn't censor freedom of speech. So it's called Behind the Smoke Curtain by Barbara Honegger. And I will direct you to that to learn the truth about 9/11. Right now, I'd like to turn our attention to my dear friend, Bruce Cornet, who is with us today. It's a very unusual circumstance how we got here. I got an email from Bruce. Bruce and I have known each other for 30 years. We've worked together on many things, everything from UFOs to alien abductions, and tonight the subject is paleontology and mass extinction. A couple of months ago, well, let me see, how long ago? It's not a month, it's August 18th. I got an email from Bruce. I opened it up, started reading it, and my mind was boggled. I said, God, look at this email he sends me. I should be reading this in Scientific American. That's actually where this belongs. And it's a remarkable article now, because I've published it on the Morningstar Report newsletter. And it's called A Novel Proposal, the ETE, the End Triassic Era Mass Extinction. The ETE was due to a solar micronova. Geological evidence found that the solar micronova affected only half the Earth, and that's only half the story. Right now, I'd like to introduce you formally to Bruce Cornet by telling you who he is, by reading to you his short biography. Both of us are very proud to be listed in Marquis' Who's Who in America. And I asked Bruce to tell me about his life, his education, and this is who Bruce Cornet is. Dr. Bruce Cornet earned his BA in biology at the University of Connecticut in 1970, his Master of Science in paleobotany at the University of Connecticut in 1973, and his PhD in geology and palynology at Penn State University in 1977. Bruce worked at Gulf Research and Development in Houston, Texas as a palynologist between 1977 and 1980, at Exxon USA in Houston as a palynologist between 1980 and 1981, then formed his own exploration company, Geminoil Incorporated, in 1981 and 82, and drilled for oil in the Richmond Basin of Virginia. Then he worked for Superior Oil Company in Houston between 1982 and 85, before that company was bought out by Mobil Oil Company. He was offered a job in a field as a field geologist, well site geologist, and palynologist at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory in New York in 1988. And he worked there until 1993, when he quit to help his new wife raise her 3 children. He began studying unidentified aerial phenomena, which I insist on still calling UFOs, in the Wallkill River and Hudson River valleys between 1992 and August of 2003, when he took a job as Deputy Administrator at NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Sciences, in 2004 in Las Vegas, Nevada. That institute was closed down 4 months after moving to Nevada, forcing him to move to El Paso, Texas, where he now resides and where he found jobs teaching physical and historical geology at 3 different colleges: El Paso Community College, Donna Ana Branch Community College in New Mexico, Raritan Community College in New Jersey, online from 2004 until his retirement in 2009. And I take great pleasure, and I'm honored to bring Dr. Bruce Cornet to talk to us about the Triassic-Jurassic Mass Extinction and a remarkable discovery that he made that should be broadcast on every major news station, every science station, and you should have been reading about it in Scientific American long ago. So Bruce, if you would turn on your camera, I would be very happy to see you and the dinosaurs. Yes, indeed, there they are. And Bruce, are you at your desk yet? I see the dinosaurs, but I don't see you.
Yeah, why am I not here?
I don't know. Well, anyway, let's get on with the program here. We'll figure out a way of getting you on camera. Maybe you are screen sharing, or I don't know. Again, Skype is getting weirder.
I'm on my camera here.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask Peter to turn off his camera for a moment, and then we'll see if you appear. And then we'll get on with this. Well, the dinosaurs are looking great. Yeah. Well, why don't you try turning off the background, and that may bring you into the foreground.
Okay.
Okay. So briefly, let me go back to the top, and it's about how and what brought about the mass extinction at the end of the Triassic era, which preceded the Jurassic era and the Cretaceous period. And Bruce.
This is really strange.
Yes, it is. Yes.
There it is. There it is.
Okay. Are you there? There he is.
I'm here.
Well, okay, that's great. Where there's a will, there's a way. And
I just had to hit the right button.
That's right. Professor Bruce Cornet. Okay, Bruce, I think I've intrigued the audience enough with my description of the subject at hand. Let's begin by telling people what was the end of the Triassic era mass extinction. Tell us what that was.
Okay. It was a time of major change on Earth as Pangea was breaking apart. That is, Africa, North America, Asia, all were part of a single supercontinent up until the end of the Triassic, and rift basins began forming as the Africa and North America began to pull apart, and the crust was being stretched and broken and folding or falling into angular blocks called half-grabens. And these half-grabens were filling up with sediment and water and lakes, and life flourished in these basins during the late Triassic. The oldest Triassic basins go back to about 230 million years when the rifting started, but we had no Atlantic Ocean at the time. I mean, you could have taken a Sunday trip over to Africa on land at that particular time.
Bruce, let me explain to the audience what this means. At one time, Africa, Europe, and North America were joined. And you could walk from Manhattan to Mauritania, which is in West Africa, and you could walk from Newfoundland to what became Spain. So Spain was way up north, contiguous with Newfoundland, and Manhattan and Mauritania were neighborhoods. So then the rift happened and the continents started to drift apart. And this created an incredible event, the formation of the Atlantic Ocean. And that's where Bruce will take it up now.
Yes. At the end of the Triassic, we had the camp, or the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, beginning to form underneath the rift that was going to, that the Atlantic Ocean was going to occupy when the continents continued to pull apart. But at the beginning, they were right next to one another, and you just had these rift basins on top. As a consequence, there was no major change taking place, no ocean forming at that time, but the magma underneath the rift that extended all the way from South America all the way up to the Arctic, it was underlain by increasing amounts of molten magma. That's why it's called the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. And in the early Jurassic, which was about 201 to 202 million years ago, that magma began to move up through cracks and fissures in the rift basins and form flood basalts within those basins. So we had a lot of basalts pouring out onto the surface and virtually scorching and covering everything within the basins. And this happened multiple times over a period of several million years. And it was generally seen that at that time, the life changed abruptly, radically in North America. I had been shown how to collect samples and extract fossil pollen and spores from them when I was working at, or student at, University of Connecticut. And I found a locality in the Hartford Basin, a rift basin that began in the Triassic and contains the Triassic-Jurassic boundary. And these lake beds were basal Jurassic in age, and they contained lots of fossil fish, which interested me and many other paleontologists at the time. I got a sample of the black muds that formed the bottom of the lake that have formed there on the eastern edge of the Hartford Basin, and I processed them at University of Connecticut. Was surprised that I got fossil spores and pollen extracted from those rocks and made microscope slides, and there was a palynologist there who had taught me how to do this procedure. And when he looked at the slides, he was shocked because he realized that this pollenifolio, as you call it, in other words, this collection of spores and pollen, was not Triassic in age. And up until that time, all of the rift basins had been thought to be Triassic. And all the maps that the USGS put out were calling all of these rift basins up and down the East Coast Triassic. And yet here I pulled out a sample that was interbedded within all of these lava flows, and it was Jurassic in age, which was shocking to the scientific community. Well,
Bruce?
Yes.
Here's one of my favorite questions of you, because I think you and I in this audience are probably the only people who know what palynologist is. And we've said that word a lot of times, and it's a unique skill. So would you tell the audience what palynology is, and then we can go on?
Spores and pollen are produced by plants. They're the male component of reproduction in plants. And even the spores go all the way down to some of the simplest types of plants that are produced. And that's one of the way they reproduce and exchange their DNA, and how we get evolution in plants, like as we do in animals. And the spores and pollen have a very unique capsule that surrounds the pollen and spore, and that is very resistant to oxidation and of elements in the air. In fact, it's like a spaceship that has to travel, relatively speaking, millions of miles from one plant to another, because the spores and pollen grains are only about 20 to 50 microns in size. And because of their hardy outer shells, they get preserved in the sediments. And when you digest the rocks and in hydrofluoric acid, and the rock breaks apart and releases these spores and pollen that you collect through heavy liquids and then transfer to slides and examine them under microscope. And that is one of the ways that palynologists age date rocks. They have studied the rocks all the way from the earliest spores that were produced back in the early Paleozoic, over 400 million years ago, all the way up to the present. And we know pretty much, based on any sample that you get from any rock, if it has spores and pollen preserved, you can compare it to that of what's known from in the fossil record and find out what age those rocks are. And as a palynologist at the oil companies, I studied these slides that were given to me from the lab that were collected from samples that they were pulling out of wells that they were drilling, and I would determine the age of those samples and provide that information to the geologists who were drilling the wells. So it was a very useful profession in order to make a living, literally. And I was fascinated by the science behind it all. And when I had found that sample in the Jurassic of the Hartford Basin, the word spread at various conferences, and my advisor for my master's degree in paleobotany told Professor Alfred Travers at Penn State about it, and he had just gotten a grant from NSF, National Science Foundation, to study all of the rocks on the East Coast of the Triassic rocks. He wanted to age date those rocks using spores and pollen, but he had no student. And here I come along, and he makes me an offer I can't refuse. So for the next 5 years, I spent going from one basin to another, collecting hundreds of samples, processing them in the lab chemically, extracting the spores and pollen from them, and age dating the rocks up and down the East Coast, which became my thesis for my doctorate. And it's considered one of the best theses that ever came out of Penn State, because it's so thorough and complete. In fact, it identified Jurassic age rocks where the geologists never thought the Jurassic existed on the East Coast. And the USGS had to redo all their maps for these basins and redate them. And that is how I got involved with studying spores and pollen and working for various oil companies. And I realized when I was collecting samples that the Richmond Basin contained some amazing fossils in it. And because the basin was one of the oldest Triassic basins on the East Coast, and it contained some of the first coal measures that were ever mined in the 13 colonies. And what another interesting aspect of it, since the basin is right next to Richmond, one of the coal measures were located on properties that were, you can still see the old entrances that are now collapsed and closed up, where the coal was pulled out, and there was a railroad track that came in there from the rest of the country and supplied the South during the Civil War with their coal. And General Lee had his office in the Cox residence at the entrance of one of the mines in the southern part of the Richmond Basin, which was really amazing. There was a lot of battles that went on in this basin and surrounding areas.
Yeah. Bruce, let's tell the people how long ago the Triassic-Jurassic era was.
It was The Triassic began at the end of the Permian about 255 million years ago. And it ended in the Triassic, with the Jurassic at about 201 million years ago. So it was approximately 54 million years in duration. And then the Jurassic continues on up until the Cretaceous. And what is fascinating about this transition to the Jurassic is that the age of dinosaurs began at the base of the Jurassic, or right after the mass extinction that occurred at the end of the Triassic. And in my processing samples and age dating these rocks, I discovered this event that had happened that caused a major turnover in North America of all the spores and pollen, and the species changed radically. Not only that, but the dinosaur tracks at the boundary where this mass extinction occurred suddenly increased threefold. So the dinosaurs got huge almost overnight. On top of that, I was looking for fossil fishes in the Hartford Basin back in 1967, one of the first field trips that I ever went on. And I went up to Mount Tom where they were excavating for Route 91, and they had beautiful fresh outcrops there, and there were channel deposits containing fossil fish. And I had a Geiger counter that I took with me. I wanted to see what types of rocks were radioactive and what rocks weren't. And when I found this fossil fish bed in the outcrop of where they're constructing I-91 highway, all the fish that I was pulling out of there were highly radioactive. This was very unusual. I had even developed built a wet chem lab in my basement. I had minored in chemistry, and I had worked for industry in chemistry. So I was able to analyze these rocks, find out what was in the fossil fish that made them so radioactive. And I found out that they were contained radioactive cesium-135. This is highly unusual because cesium does not have a half-life that goes back to 200 million years. And I was puzzled by it. And so I didn't really get any answer to that until I had talked to Dr. John Brandenburg, who worked for the government Sandia labs and a nuclear physicist. And he's the individual who had recognized two massive fission nuclear explosions on Mars, which ended the life on Mars back about 500 million years ago. And what is strange is that right after that happened, the life began on Earth about 500 million years ago. In other words, the complex life switched from Mars to Earth. And I asked him, why is there cesium-135? And he says, well, that's simple. He says, it's a decay product of lead-144, which is a decay product of your common uranium-235. And he said, that's not an unexpected process through time. So literally, what I found was evidence for radioactive elements being laid down on Earth at that moment in time, 201 million years ago.
That's fascinating. We have about 2 minutes before the break, and I think this has set the ground for a remarkable discovery which you made, which was why were the fish radioactive? But well, let's hold that for the second hour.
Yeah, well, there's another aspect of it what I don't want you to skip over, and that is what other people were thinking caused the extinctions.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead. We'll take it.
The first thing they thought of was a meteor impact. like the Chicxulub crater that wiped out the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous 65, 66 million years ago. But they couldn't find a crater, a smoking gun for the crater. Then they thought it was gas being issued out with all the volcanic activity. All the basalts were releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and they were able to determine that the CO2 content in the early Jurassic, 200 to 201 billion years ago, was higher than it is today, even due to man. But nobody was able to tie the cause of the extinctions to the basalt flows. They thought they were very close in time, but the problem is that the oldest basalt flows are about 50 to 100,000 years younger than the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. In other words, the extinction occurred and then the basalts came out. And another discovery coming from China is that they studied the Triassic-Jurassic boundary there, and they found no mass extinction on the opposite side of the Earth. So the extinctions only occurred on one side of the Earth, the Atlantic side, not on the Pacific side.
Bruce,
yes.
We're at the break, but
Okay.
You said something very important. You said there was more CO2 in the atmosphere then than there is even now.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to take that up because the Carboniferous era marked the greatest expansion of life on Earth up to that time. So we'll take that up when we come back from the break. Folks, stay tuned.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.